we're talking about today is housing, and in particular right now, the kind of direct experience of health and well-being in homes. First of all, I'll ask Bindi, you've got a few slides to talk through. So first we'll hear from Bindi, who is the CEO of the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand, who will share to start with.
Great, thanks. Good morning, or good afternoon, sorry now. I'm really delighted to be here this morning and to talk about something actually I'm quite passionate about, health and wellbeing and how it actually relates to real estate. But first of all, I'll start with the numbers, just to put things into perspective. So 300 million. This is the amount of asthma, cases of asthma across the globe, and that a large proportion actually can be attributable to damp houses. Second is 21 degrees for housing, and what we want, what is considered as good housing is between 18 and 21 degrees. At the moment, it's around 16 degrees. 40,000 are the number of cases of childhood illness that are admitted to hospital just because of poor housing. And in fact, New Zealand has one of the highest cases of asthma and respiratory problems in the OECD. And so I guess the worst one is really the 1,600 of New Zealanders' lives are cut short by poor housing, living in cold and damp conditions. So what I'm trying to say is pretty bleak. And I was thinking, wow, for New Zealand and how progressive we are, these statistics are quite concerning. And just thinking about our actual houses, I mean, Brands has done a lot of research on this, and at the moment, 47% of houses lack proper insulation at the moment, and 52% have mould. So I think what we're getting a sense of is that this is an area that absolutely needs addressing, because what it does is it not just impacts people's daily lives, it impacts wider society. If you think people are living in cold houses with little children, missing school because they don't go to, because they're sick, that impacts their education. It impacts the wider society and economy. So we have something that we need to address. And so really what really causes the issue, and I know you probably know this better than anyone, but really we've got a poorly insulated housing. We've got 50% of the heat being lost in the roofs and the floors. And it's just the fact that so many of our houses just don't even have adequate insulation at the moment. We've got a lack of ventilation as well, not air being circulated. We have ineffective heating. Gas heaters, some of these gas heaters actually produce more moisture in the properties that, it actually adds to the problem, not taking it away. And we've got a lot of old houses in New Zealand that just haven't had the proper design and making the most of solar or new construction and developments and innovation. So really, what we've been focusing on at the Real Estate Institute is really, what makes a healthy home. Obviously, it's insulation, it's heating, and it's ventilation. And we're out there communicating as much as possible to our 15,000 members, including property managers as well, of why this is so important, not just for for our society, but for our housing, but also for a wider benefit for society. And what can we do to fix it? So we've got the Residential Tenancies Act that's been brought into 2016, putting the standards in place. I mean, this has been around for a little while now, making sure that renters' homes have adequate insulation, healthy homes. Big thing that's come out in December last year, as you probably know, that making sure we have minimum standards across a range of criteria in houses, and we're working with industry to make sure that that the real estate market know all about this, and that they ensure that property managers and landlords put these things in place. I know we have more clarity to come, but this will be completely an area of focus. Next generation of buildings. I mean, you're talking today about the innovative products and designs that are coming out, and we need to actually educate why they're beneficial for our society. And building codes, we've got grants given by the government in terms of, particularly people with in poverty-stricken areas about actually accessing new grants. And vision. I think what's really important is we have a vision for what we want for New Zealand. Do we want to be having the highest asthma and respiratory problems in the OECD, or are we going to do something about it? And so it's working together in forums such as these, collaborating, understanding the issues and how we can work together cross-sector to actually tackle these problems. And there's a lot of things that people can do day to day, just even ventilating, opening up the house. I'm the worst in terms of trying to dry my washing on a towel heaters at the moment, more moisture in the building. Having insulation, just putting insulation in our house, it's only a few $1,000s, and I know that seems a lot for a lot of people, but it's actually educating the actual energy savings that they're going to have over time. And I just think that there's such long-term benefits if we collaborate and work as an industry on our health and well-being, the education of our children and our workforce going forward, and also savings. And we've also got the long-term condition. I get asked constantly where people should invest their money in their housing, and I know that we've had astronomical price growth at the moment. I mean, it's lucky that Auckland's starting to taper off. The investor market's kind of drying up a bit because all of these new conditions are coming out. But absolutely, if people invest in good heating, good insulation, they will not lose money on their investment. In fact, people are looking for this when they buy property and when they rent property. So I just want to quickly, lastly, touch on, people go, what are you doing about it? We've got these issues, but what are you doing about it? So we work with industry day to day on understanding and making sure that they know about these changes. We work with government, really advocating on these issues. And I think what's really good about this new government is they listen. They'll get people in a room, they'll make sure that they're listening to the day-to-day practicality. And I think that all of the initiatives that they're bringing out with Healthy Homes is an example of this, to make sure it's practical as well. And we do a lot of conferences and education, just bringing people together. What are the issues? What's the discussion? Let's work on them together in our society to make New Zealand a better place. So thanks.
And I'd now like to introduce, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Rhys Jones, Ngāti Kahungunu, if I said that right, who is a public health medicine specialist and senior lecturer in Māori health at the University of Auckland. Welcome.
Kia ora, thanks, Andrea. Tēnā tātou katoa, e te tuatahi ka mihi ki Ngāti Whātua o Rākei, mo tō mihi mai oha ki a mātou i tēnei ata. Me ngā mihi nunui ki ngā kai whakahaere o tēnei hui a whare, tēnā koutou katoa, huri no te whare, tēnā koutou. So kia ora, and thank you for the opportunity to talk today. And to those people who have been involved in organising this hui a whare, this housing summit, which I think is really important. I have to put in a disclaimer here that I know pretty much nothing about housing or the construction sector. Although, I live in a house, but that's about the extent of my expertise. Although, as a public health doctor, what I do know about is about what we call the determinants of health, or those things that contribute to whether we're healthy or not. And believe it or not, housing is a really big part of that. There are lots of other things. There's income, education, employment, lots of things about the way our society is structured, but housing is key there. I'm co-convener of an organisation called Ora Taiao, the New Zealand Climate and Health Council, and in that role I have a real key interest in the sort of intersection of health, sustainability, equity, and housing, among other things. We're a group of health professionals, over 600 members now, really advocating for strong, urgent, healthy and equitable action on climate change. And you might wonder, well, what are a bunch of doctors and health professionals interested in climate change for? Isn't that all about polar bears and things like that? No, I can tell you that climate change has been described as the defining health issue of our time. That's just not just me saying that, that's a lot of our leading health organisations, really conservative medical journals, the World Health Organization, etc., etc. So there's a really strong consensus that climate change is a big health issue. On the other hand, as well as being a major threat to health, climate change and tackling climate change is also recognised as perhaps the greatest health opportunity that we have. So a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, I actually see as these are really key health interventions. There's a whole lot of win-win opportunities that we have. We think about active transport, we think about our diets. All these things can be done in ways which really improve our health at the same time as contributing to those goals that we have around reducing emissions, playing our fair role in mitigating global climate change. Not only that though, if we plan those actions well, we can contribute to a more equitable and fairer society. So we know that a lot of the health issues that we're talking about predominantly affect our more vulnerable populations. If we can address those in the context of tackling climate change, we can also contribute to equity and a fairer society for Aotearoa. And healthy housing is a really great example of one of these win-win opportunities that we have for climate, health and equity. As we've heard this morning, in New Zealand, our homes are quite frankly pretty crap, really crap, I would say. I think we talk about housing stock. I think it's more of a laughing stock, really, if you think about it from an international perspective. But it really is no laughing matter for those families who are really most directly impacted by the poor housing that we have. We've got, as Bindi's been talking about, we've got kids getting sick, needing hospitalisation really unnecessarily. Hundreds of people dying each winter because of cold, damp, poor quality housing, from respiratory conditions, from infectious diseases. We heard, as Shamabil said this morning, talking about rheumatic fever. I was just at a talk yesterday where they were talking about rheumatic fever in Northland and how actually a lot of the problem was not so much that families weren't bringing their kids to see the doctor with sore throats. It was that GPs weren't picking up the sore throats or weren't diagnosing them correctly in order to prevent rheumatic fever. And a lot of the reason for that was because in remote parts of Northland, they get a lot of overseas locum doctors or overseas trained doctors who generally, coming from developed countries, do not see rheumatic fever and so aren't as attuned to the risk of sore throats. So, that just puts it in perspective for us, I think, that we've got a big job here. And as well as being incredibly bad for our health, obviously, those poor quality homes are bad for climate change, bad for the environment, and that's a lot of what we need to do. So really, retrofitting insulation, building high quality, healthy homes is a really important way of addressing a number of the challenges that we're facing. One thing I would say though is it's not quite that simple. You can't just, do something. There's no magic bullet that we're going to just fix this all in one go. As obviously many of you will realise, there's huge complexity in this. And one of the things that I think we risk doing sometimes is if we focus on a single objective, like say reducing our carbon footprint in our housing stock, then we have the potential for a lot of negative unintended consequences. So I think we've heard a little bit this morning about systems thinking, about joined up policies, and I think we need to really focus on that as a way of avoiding some of the unintended consequences that we can face if we just focus on a single goal. So that means making sure that addresses the neighbourhood impacts, the health impacts, social, cultural impacts that we can gain from really improving our housing. And that means actually a transdisciplinary or sort of a joined up collaborative way of addressing these issues that brings in not just the housing sector obviously, but health, many other different sectors, Māori, Pacific communities, mana whenua, really tackling the problem from all angles. So I think I'd really encourage us to take that perspective, to work collaboratively, to engage with communities, and I think that's going to be really important for getting these win-wins, okay, and making sure that we get all the co-benefits that are on offer through improving our housing. And I think that in that context, I was reminded of this as I was reading the little message on my poi that was at my table there, and it said, mā ngā rangatahi te ao e panoni. And so it's talking about how young people will change the world. Our youth will be the driving force behind changing the world. And given what we've heard about the longevity of our housing stock, you know, and thinking about if we're doing something now, building new houses, fixing current houses for the next 50 to 100 years, really we want our youth to be at the leading edge of that and to be, you know, really contributing meaningfully to the way we design not just our houses but our communities and our cities and our society in general. So I think I'll leave it with that for now, but look forward to some further questions and discussion. And just to really reiterate the point, I think that healthy and sustainable housing is a really important part of New Zealand's move to a zero carbon future, but it's also really important for health, for equity, and for a whole lot of other social goals that we have. Nō reira e te iwi, tēnā koutou katoa.
Okay, so in a minute I'm going to be welcoming up a couple of other panellists to the stage. But just before I do that, I might ask a couple of questions. So one relates to one on Slido here, and that has been a theme, I guess, that's come up a little bit. Minister Salisa talked about a kind of whole of system approach. Shamabeel talked about a coordinated approach. You know, so, and I think many of us in the room understand that it's going to take many players to bring about change and to move towards kind of health and well-being in our built environment. So I'm just wondering, from your perspectives, from your organisations, what do you see as, you know, the specific role of, you know, the university and Ora Tau and the Real Estate Institute? What are the specific roles and actions that you see being played out in this kind of coordinated approach and this move forward? Perhaps, I don't know, starting with Bindi, perhaps?
Yeah, one thing I mentioned as well, it is really important that we all just talk and collaborate. I think that the power of a unified approach is much more just than trying to obviously do it on our own. And what we do is making sure, one is around education as well, that making sure that people know about the implications and why they need to do things. I think another way is working with government and getting the industry on side with government as well, so they actually listen to the practicality of things. So they might put legislation in place, but realistically it's probably not quite practical on a day-to-day level, so making sure that we coordinate in that way. And I just think that we just get alongside with just other key industry players to have the conversations and to work out how we can just take things forward. And I think accountability is huge. Like, we can all talk about it, and unless we have action and accountability, it's probably not going to go many places. But obviously having that legislation as well in place is a key aspect of people having momentum to do something.
Great.
And I think working in a university myself and kind of being involved in the research space, I think research does have a particular role to play. And I'm not so expert in it myself, but some colleagues of mine are really involved in systems dynamic modelling, which is really getting at this idea of systems thinking, where you bring together all the different players involved, and affected by a particular issue, and actually tease out some models that look at, what are the potential impacts of a policy or an intervention, what might be some of the unintended consequences, what can you do to mitigate some of those things. And really, by having everyone in the room, you can develop some kind of shared understandings around what those different issues might be for different players, and I think that's a really important way forward. I think also one of the things, and I was reminded of it actually right from the beginning of our day today, when the mihi from Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, and they talked about their own papakainga housing. And I think it's really important that communities are a huge part of that, the way Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei develop their housing is likely to be very different from the way other communities might develop their housing based on their particular needs. And so I think having communities as a big part of that systems thinking, that collaborative work to design housing policies is really important.
So I guess, given that there are so many kind of players involved, who does responsibility lie with when it comes to, warm, dry, efficient homes? Do you think there is any, a particular player in the mix that has most responsibility, or is it really going to be this kind of shared responsibility?
But we think that it's the landlords that if they're renting out. 50% of people rent in New Zealand at the moment. And that's, so there's a lot of responsibility for landlords to make sure that their housing's adequate. Unless we have the guidelines in place to help them with that, that's difficult in the legislation. So I think it's really important that landlords do that. That's where I think it sits. But also that people renting have to call it out. We have to have some tough conversations with, it's not right. It's not right to have this leak, a damp house. It's not right to have the window not fixed, and really calling out to make things to happen for them.
Cool. Now I'd like to welcome up to the stage our additional panellists. That's right. So we've got Te Aorangi Corbett here today with her son, Caden. Thank you. That's weird. So Te Aorangi has, transitioned from being in an older home, a Housing New Zealand State House, and is now occupying a Homestar 6 home. So we're going to hear from her. And then also I'd like to welcome to the stage as well Zane, who's also gone through a bit of a transformation with his own home. And I'll stand up. You guys take a seat. So Zane is a licensed builder and has done a pretty major transformation on his own home, and has also been in the building trade for 20 years and done lots of redevelopments of other homes as well. So I guess today we are talking about health and well-being in our homes, and I'm really interested to know, I guess, what for both of you, what your kind of direct experience with this has been. So perhaps Te Aorangi, starting with you. You've gone a transition from an older version of a state home into a newer version, and if you can just talk for a minute about your kind of experience in that transition in terms of your kind of health and well-being for the family and that kind of thing.
Well, the first housing house that I had, it had mould in it, and it was damp and freezing cold in winter. And the airflow throughout the house wasn't that great. And then, they've moved me to a brand new one, and it's completely different. Like, my son no longer has asthma anymore. And he also had eczema, which he doesn't have anymore. So that's a real big thing for us, because I'm not having to take him to the doctor all the time due to his health problems.
Yeah.
And the house is a lot warmer. Like, it's double glazing. They use the thermal curtains, and it's more open planned instead of all the rooms being closed off, and you're having to heat each individual home. They've made it so that you pretty much have to heat one room and it goes to all the others.
And was the transition challenging, being moved from one place to another, or have the benefits kind of completely outweighed any?
Definitely outweighed.
Yeah.
I couldn't wait to move.
Yeah.
I think
no
I moved
attachment
all
to
in
the
one
old
day.
place.
Yeah. As soon as I got my keys, I was in there the same night.
And then Zane, you've also gone through a bit of a transition, transformation with your own home. What's that experience been like for you and your family, going from an older, I think it was 1970s, was it? 1967 kind of uninsulated home, and doing a major transformation. So how has that kind of impacted on your family and your family's health?
It's been educational, challenging, but at the end of it all, it's absolutely rewarding. What Bindi mentioned about 21 degrees being the optimum temperature. I wake up every morning, I've become obsessed with thermometers in my house, and I wake up and I feel absolutely rewarded with the hard work and effort that we put into the house. This house was built in 1967, had little plants growing in the corners of the windows. So we purchased the house in late 2014, zero insulation. It had some good benefits to it. It had a water tank, so it was had the opportunity to collect water, but that was broken and disused. So we completely stripped the house inside and out and built it back to what it is today. So we've achieved we're the first house in Auckland to achieve a 10. first house in North Island to achieve a 10, and the first house in the country to achieve a 10 from a renovation. So we're really proud of that. It's fantastic. So there isn't a day that I go home at this stage, and I'm really proud and happy to be living in the house. So we experienced with my daughters, within the year before we did the renovation, they had croup, they had the worst colds I can remember, and so in doing this renovation, as I said, the house climate is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's been a bit of talk around, tenants and legislation to require landlords to insulate. If we talk now just briefly about homeowners, and this is, I guess, a question for all of you, do you think there is an awareness to start with for homeowners, enough self-motivation to kind of, do these kind of changes to their homes, and, incentives and things? Should we be focusing on homeowners as well? So I guess, and you've worked on lots of projects in Grey Lynn and renovating old homes. Do you see, when you're working on projects, that any kind of interest in, moving to efficiency?
I think probably the biggest problem that the industry faces is education. I think because the government has a standard, that's what everyone sets as the benchmark. In my opinion, the benchmark's too low. I remember when we first started building, I started my building career in the early 90s, and we saw a change in Auckland from single glaze to double glaze, and at that time, every single builder and his dog said, we don't need double glazing. In my house, I've got double glazed, thermally broken, low-E glass with argon gas. So we've gone to the other extreme. We've absolutely overkilled it. We've gone as best as we can for today's technology. So, education is one of the biggest issues, I think, with homeowners out there, because I think what was said earlier in the day, having a bigger lounge is far more important than perhaps insulating your house to a higher rating. And I just think if homeowners are educated better, I think spec builders, I totally get where they're coming from. They want to build a house for the least price, get the best return on their investment. So they're not looking to up the insulation, they're not looking to go for better windows, because at the end of the day, if they're meeting the minimum criteria, that's where they make their money. So I think education is the biggest thing.
And Bindi, you mentioned that that's one of the roles of real estate, and is informing people. Do you see that as, I guess, one of the key things that needs to happen? Yeah,
absolutely. I think the importance of education is just paramount, and it's about really. I think that the knowledge of consumers is getting better, and the more, because there's more about this. There's more research in the market now. It's been brought to attention. So I think that consumers are actually looking for these things in their own houses, but also when they purchase a house. And so it's really up to helping real estate agents to be able to communicate the benefits and of that house, even using technology, and how technology is really helping with that as well, with sustainable housing and internet enabled and all of those things. But even the standard basic fundamentals, I think that it's just making sure that real estate agents can communicate it and consumers are aware of it.
Great. Yeah. Just a final quick question. We leave us with one quick thing which you see as a real positive, great opportunity, a catalyst for change that you see, that you think is a real positive thing that you'd like to quickly finish off with. Reece?
So I think the example of Māori owned and led and developed housing, like the Papakainga housing here in Auckland, is I think a really good example of how, if you invest leadership in communities, then you'll get outcomes for not just good housing, but social, environmental, cultural, health, and other outcomes.
Right.
I just think that industry collaboration, making sure we have a vision as a country, and that we keep up the conversations. But also, I'm looking forward to healthy homes coming in, so at least we have some really clear guidelines for the industry of what's actually required and what we should be doing as a country with our houses.
Well, for me, I reckon that if you build a really good home, then your tenant's going to look after it, and that in itself will be a bigger investment for you. Then if you build a cheaper house, your tenant's not going to look after it, and then you end up losing all your money anyways.
I've got lots of things I could say, but I think the biggest thing is that healthier homes it creates healthy people. And at the end of the day, I think the government, they need to take a real serious look at it, because at the end of the day, when you look at the healthcare bills in the country, if you can get healthier homes, healthier people, healthcare bills come down, and we've got a healthier society all around. I mean, at the end of the day, if I was buying a house, which I'd be carrying me out of this one, but if I was to buy another house, I personally would want to know what's in the walls, but people don't see or know what's behind walls. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much to our panellists.